Wild West sheriffs maintained law and order on the frontier alongside their fellow lawmen and the local populace. While often portrayed in dramatized and exaggerated fashion in movies and other media, the life of a Wild West sheriff was unquestionably perilous, but it could also veer into the realm of tedium. Facts concerning Old West sheriffs uncover that a substantial portion of their time was devoted to political campaigning, tax collection, and generally executing county-related responsibilities that bore little connection to the enforcement of criminal laws. As elected officials representing their counties, Wild West sheriffs epitomized an increasingly regulated way of life on the western frontier. The existence of a Wild West sheriff, a position occupied by individuals such as Wild Bill Hickok, Wyatt Earp, and Bat Masterson, was characterized by both the mundane and the exhilarating. They weren't just gunslingers, they were also politicians. Wild West sheriffs were adept with firearms, but their proficiency alone did not secure them a badge. These sheriffs were elected by the residents of their counties, either through regular elections or special ballots. In the late summer of 1869, James Butler Hickok, renowned as Wild Bill, assumed the role of sheriff in Ellis County, Kansas, a region yearning for an end to prevailing chaos. Hickok's methods of maintaining peace, however, proved too forceful for the locals. After dispatching at least 2 men, Bill Mulvey and Samuel Strawhun, Hickok was ousted from office during the subsequent regular election in November. Hickok was supplanted by Peter Rattlesnake, Pete Lanihan, his deputy, who ran as the Democratic candidate. Although he did not secure another term, Hickok's brief tenure as sheriff earned recognition from a Kansas newspaper for his efforts to rid Hays City of dangerous individuals. In 1877, when Bat Masterson campaigned for the position of sheriff in Dodge City, he utilized local newspapers to solicit support, asserting that he was earnestly soliciting the suffrages of the people for the role, while simultaneously distancing himself from politics. Masterson's campaign proved successful, and he assumed the office of sheriff in Dodge City in January 1878. He swiftly gained renown among his constituents as someone who was calm, decisive, and a formidable figure with a pistol. They had to persuade civilians to risk their lives. Occupying the role of sheriff in an Old West town could entail extended periods of inactivity or mundane tasks like street cleaning. Conversely, it might involve the assembly of a posse of individuals, potentially deputizing them when confronting genuine threats. Assembling a posse, referred to as posse comitatus, or composed of civilians, was among the most potent tools available to a sheriff, and this practice still holds a place in legal books today. In 1878, the federal government prohibited the military from assisting civilian posses, thereby enhancing the significance of civilian involvement in upholding law and order. Deputized posses, such as the Lincoln County Regulators, which notably included Billy the Kid, engaged in multiple confrontations with a rival posse led by Sheriff William Brady during the 1878 Lincoln County War. This conflict, originating in the New Mexico Territory before it achieved statehood, ultimately claimed the lives of 19 men. They contended with competing lawmen operating in ambiguous jurisdictions. Sheriffs were responsible for entire counties, but they were not the sole law enforcement figures in these regions. Alongside town marshals and other local law enforcement officers, sheriffs frequently encountered, or clashed with, federal marshals. Town marshals could hold positions as elected or appointed officials. Wyatt Earp, for instance, served as a deputy town marshal or a simple peace officer across various locations in Kansas, while his brother, Virgil, assumed the role of town marshal in Tombstone. The U.S. Marshal Service, established in 1789, was tasked with handling matters falling under federal jurisdiction, including serving warrants, apprehending wrongdoers, and transporting prisoners. During the mid to late 19th century, U.S. Marshals and Deputy Marshals traversed the Wild West, visiting towns where law enforcement was scarce or non-existent. When U.S. Marshals encountered county sheriffs or town marshals, they might collaborate with local law enforcement, or they might just as easily find themselves at odds. For instance, Deputy Marshal Robert Widdenman arrived in New Mexico and arrested several local deputies serving under Sheriff William J. Brady, who was also a deputy marshal, only to be subsequently arrested by Brady himself. Yet other jurisdictions also played a role. The military maintained its own law enforcement officers on the frontier, and in places like Texas, the Rangers patrolled the border with Mexico. They had to disband or mobilize vigilante groups. A posse comitatus could easily transform into a vigilante group, taking matters into their own hands while ostensibly acting within the bounds of the law. Authentic vigilante groups might form in response to property violations, particularly horse theft, but they were just as likely to target individuals who did not conform to the community's norms. Vigilante groups were known for their acts of lynching, banishment, or harassment, often directed at minorities and loose females. Being off-duty was never an option. In the role of a sheriff within an Old West township, one could never predict when turmoil might erupt. Sheriff Tom Logan experienced this firsthand. In the year 1906, he met his demise while confronting a cantankerous professional gambler. Logan, the sheriff of Nye County, NV, was clad in nothing more than his nightshirt when he arrived at the mining town's House of Ill Fame, known as the Jewel House. There, he encountered patron Walter Barriot, engaged in a brawl with May Biggs, the establishment's proprietor. Barriot drew his firearm on the unarmed sheriff and discharged it 5 times at Logan. According to the accounts of witnesses, even after sustaining gunshot wounds, Logan was observed restraining Barriot on the ground, gripping his hands, in which Barriot clutched a revolver. Ultimately, Tom Logan succumbed to his injuries, but was celebrated as a hero for his tenure as sheriff. They enforced stringent regulations on firearms. Despite common depictions of the Old West suggesting a lack of firearm regulation and rampant gun violence, numerous towns and cities actually imposed strict laws prohibiting the carrying of firearms. For instance, in Tombstone, located within the territory that would later become Arizona, visitors were obliged to surrender their weapons upon entering the town. Men were expected to relinquish their firearms at a local hotel or the office of the town's lawman. In 1881, the town marshal overseeing these regulations was Virgil Earp. In his endeavor to maintain order on Tombstone streets, Marshal Earp deputized his 2 brothers, Wyatt and Morgan, as well as John Henry "Doc" Holliday, to assist him. When cowboys Billy Clanton and Tom and Frank McClory refused to comply with the Earps and Holliday's demand to surrender their weapons, it culminated in a confrontation that left the cowboys dead. Tombstone was not the sole township with gun control ordinances. Locations like Deadwood, SD, Virginia City, NV, and Dodge City, KS, all made efforts to regulate firearms, although with varying degrees of success. In 1874, Dodge City restricted the possession of weapons to law enforcement officers exclusively. They were tax collectors. When sheriffs were not engaged in safeguarding the populace, they undertook other responsibilities on behalf of the county. One of the most prevalent duties for a sheriff involved tax collection, a task previously performed by their English counterparts known as shire reeves. Collecting taxes enabled sheriffs not only to compensate themselves, but also to remunerate their deputies and any additional personnel who collaborated with them. Some were essentially outlaws. Themselves, Sheriff Henry Plummer of Bannack, MT, led a band of marauders known as the Innocents and conducted himself much like an outlaw. In the Wild West, many sheriffs had affiliations with outlaw activities, either in their past roles or simultaneously while holding positions of law enforcement. Wyatt Earp, for instance, had a period in his youth when he engaged in outlawry, while Sheriff Dave Updike of Ada County, ID, was suspected of being involved in unlawful acts, including extortion and theft of substantial sums, including several bars of gold. Born in New York, Dave Updike relocated to Boise, ID, in 1864. He assumed the role of the first sheriff of Ada County in the same year. However, it didn't take long for Updike to organize a group of individuals accused of a string of robberies and homicides. Following the Portneuf Canyon stagecoach robbery in 1865, mounting evidence suggested Updike's complicity in illicit activities. He supplied the wrongdoers with weapons for the crime, which resulted in the deaths of 5 individuals, although some sources state 4, and the disappearance of $75,000 or $86,000 worth of gold. Subsequently, Updike faced indictment for embezzlement of public funds and resigned from his post as sheriff. He met his end at the hands of a vigilante group in April 1866. To this day, the whereabouts of the stolen gold remains a mystery.